The Great Sphinx, we think, was originally an entirely lion-bodied monument 12,000 years ago or so. Its head was recarved in the dynastic period into the head of a pharaoh. And that's why the head is so out of proportion with the rest of the body of the Sphinx.
In the Giza necropolis, outside of the three massive stone monuments, a pharaoh sits, facing the east, gazing at the rising sun with each vernal equinox. Its face is that of a pharaoh, but its body is that of a lion. Its head closely resembles that of Pharaoh Khafre, the builder of the second pyramid, but we know it by another unofficial name, the Great Sphinx of Giza. The consensus among Egyptologists and archaeologists is that the Sphinx was built during the 4th dynasty as a means of commemorating the reign of the Pharaoh Khafre. From the front, we can compare side-by-side images of the Sphinx's face in relation to Pharaoh Khafre. There is a strong resemblance. But was this the Sphinx's original appearance? Why do we still refer to it as the Sphinx, when it should be given a title like the Great Khafre of Giza? Was the true face of the Sphinx a pharaoh at all? The word Sphinx is not Egyptian, but rather Greek. The word is derived from the Greek word sphingo, meaning to tighten or squeeze. It represented a monster with the head of a woman that would suffocate its victims to death who were unable to solve its riddle. The truth is, the real name of the Sphinx is unknown, as there are no references to the Sphinx in the entire corpus of Egyptian text, even during the 4th dynasty reign of Khafre. How could such an iconic figure be totally ignored by the scribes of ancient Egypt? There is not one inscription that connects the Sphinx to Khafre, except for one stone tablet. The dream stele that rests between the paws of the Sphinx bears a partial inscription of the name Khafre, yet it was constructed 1,000 years after the agreed-upon date of the Sphinx. According to the legend, the future king Thutmose IV had fallen asleep under the shadow of the still-buried Sphinx. While asleep, he dreamt that the Sphinx promised to make him king of Egypt if he would uncover its paws buried underneath the desert sand. When he became king, Thutmose IV placed the dream stele in between the paws of the Sphinx in 1401 BCE in commemoration of the dream he had earlier. But this dream stele was created 1,000 years after the reign of Khafre, proving that it was not part of the core body. Another artifact, called the inventory stele, was discovered in 1858, stating that the Sphinx was not built during the reign of Khafre. In fact, it was already in existence during the reign of his father Khufu. The stele states that Khufu had found the Sphinx, made reparations to its headdress, and then chose to build his pyramid within close proximity. Khufu built the temples at the place of Horem-Market and restored the statue. We can either choose to take the inventory stele at face value, or reinterpret it, trying to decipher what its author truly meant. Dr. Mark Lehner, renowned Egyptologist, has stated that the purpose of this stele was, no doubt, told to give greater antiquity and authenticity to the fledgling cult. A colleague of Lehner went as far to say that the inventory stele is an anachronistic invention, a pious fraud. But by whom? Who would go through such lengths to fabricate this evidence, even as far back as 1858? Lehner believes that it was to give greater authenticity to a fledgling cult. How can we make such an assumption from text that is clearly written? We would be manipulating an ancient narrative to fit our timeline. Can we really claim to know more about Egypt than the Egyptians? In 1936, another limestone stele was discovered north of the Sphinx. Formerly referred to as the Great Limestone Stele of Amenhotep II, which refers to the Giza necropolis as the pyramids of Horem-Market. When used in this context, he is stating that the Sphinx was constructed before the reign of Khufu and Khafre. An artifact in Giza belonging to the Prince of Old Kingdom Egypt depicts a man kneeling in front of the Great Sphinx. The inscription reads, "Adoration to Hor-Akti, the great god, the Lord of Heaven." Hor-Akti was represented as a solar deity, commonly depicted as a lion with the head of either a falcon or a human. A round disc sits above its head, clearly depicting the rising sun, facing due east. During the reign of the New Kingdom, 1500 to 1150 BCE, it was given the name Horem-Market. In the Old Kingdom, it was given the name Hor-Akti, meaning Horus of the horizon. There are about 50 votive stelae that refer to the Sphinx as either Horakti or Re-Horakti. If we keep the dictum "as above, so below" in mind, we see that Hore Makhet was the name given to the Sphinx of Giza, while Re-Horakti is meant to refer to a Horus in the horizon. In other words, there is a celestial counterpart to the Great Sphinx. Was the Great Sphinx truly built during the 4th dynasty, and was it originally made in the likeness of Khafre? Two different experts in facial recognition arrived at two different conclusions. Again, it is up to the viewer to decide. In 1993, police detective Frank Domingo, an expert in facial recognition from the NYPD, studied the Sphinx on location and analyzed it in detail. His years of facial recognition and profiling work with the NYPD gave him a solid understanding of jaw structure and the proportionality of facial features. He argued that the lower jaw of the Sphinx jutted forward in a manner unlike the normal depiction of Khafre. He also argued that the Sphinx's head was more of a Nubian shape of African ancestry. His official statement was as follows: "After reviewing all the measurements, angles, and proportions, it's my conclusion that the Great Sphinx of Giza is not the same individual represented in the statue of Khafre. When we compare the side profiles of a statue of Khafre imposed over that of the Sphinx, two very different results are produced." This is a side profile of the statue Khafre enthroned, superimposed over the head of the Sphinx. Pay attention to the vastly different jaw structure of the Sphinx, the protruding lower jaw, enlarged lips and chin. In contrast, the statue of Khafre depicts a much smaller jaw, smaller lips, no lower jaw protrusion, and a sharp, slanting nose. In 1999, a group of scientists from the Forensic Institute in Germany examined the face of the Sphinx using precision computer software. They concluded that the Sphinx indeed was the likeness of Khafre. Two very different outcomes by two different parties. The question now is whether the Sphinx was originally built in the 4th dynasty to commemorate Khafre, or was it rather reworked during his reign? Is it possible that Khafre had Nubian genes that led to the head's unique appearance? If so, why isn't this same jaw structure present in his most prominent statue, Khafre enthroned? While the facial view from the front appears to resemble Khafre, the lower jaw portion still does not match. With that said, it is possible that Khafre salvaged the original design to bear his likeness from the front view, ignoring the obvious discrepancy from the side view. We can now move away from the face of this beast and examine its body. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch has stated that the core body of the Sphinx has been weathered severely. It is minimally 2.7 times older than 4,500 years ago. In other words, it was built during the age of circa 10,000 BCE in his estimate. This would have placed it far beyond the reign of the 4th dynasty. The Sphinx sits at the edge of the Sahara, which has been a hyper-arid desert for the past 5,000 years. 10,500 years ago, the Sahara Desert in which Giza is located would have been a lush green patch of fertile land. Rainfall was common in this region, further suggesting the Sphinx's exposure to the elements. The limestone blocks within the Sphinx enclosure have been removed by its builders to make the valley and mortuary temples. The Sphinx and valley temples are comprised of massive stone blocks, some weighing as much as 200 tons apiece. Modern cranes can typically pick up a maximum load of 20 tons at the closest distance and 5 tons at the longest distance. Loads larger than 50 tons require a special crane. Imagine what it must have taken to lift a 200-ton block of limestone. Robert Schoch has stated that the granite weathering of the Sphinx and valley temples matches that of the Sphinx, leading him to believe they were built during the same era. The enclosure surrounding the Sphinx also bears erosion marks due to years of water weathering. Sand erosion is commonplace to this area, but this type of weathering was completely different. It was water weathering caused by thousands of years of rainfall. Sand erosion marks are horizontal in appearance, while water erosion marks are long, vertical, undulating fissures. These patterns are most evident in the Sphinx enclosure, followed by a gully on the corner of the enclosure wall. The Sphinx has undergone several revisions since its initial construction, partially due to restorations by building teams and harsh exposure to the elements. The natural limestone of the Sphinx's core body has gradually worn away due to sand erosion and pollution, with 0.2 inches of stone being worn off the Sphinx's chest every year. Japanese scientist Chikaosa Tanimoto has estimated that in 200 years, the neck region of the Sphinx will no longer be able to support its head, causing it to collapse. This scenario should give you an idea of how powerful erosion is, 0.2 inches every year. Now imagine what prolonged exposure to rain would do to the Sphinx's core body and its enclosure, and what the core body of the Sphinx looked like 4,000 years ago. To go even further, imagine its appearance 10,000 years ago. First-time visitors to the Sphinx are often puzzled by the odd body proportions. The head is completely out of proportion with the rest of the core body. Ancient Egyptians were masters of sculpting and aesthetic design. Compare the appearance of the Great Sphinx of Giza to the avenue of the Sphinxes at Luxor. All those sphinxes have a head that is in proportion with the rest of their body. The Greek father of history, Herodotus, claims that Khafre was originally a cruel and forceful ruler like his father. It is entirely possible that he had the Great Sphinx of Giza reworked in order to fit his likeness, as many dictators have done throughout history. Given the odd body proportions and the appearance of the head in relation to the body, this is a possible scenario. There has been a distinct silence across the body of Egyptian texts concerning the Sphinx. All references to the name Horem Machet come from the New Kingdom, while Old Kingdom sources make no reference. If the Sphinx was built during the Old Kingdom reign of Khafre, as the consensus states, why would they fail to recognize or name it even once? There is a distinct possibility that it was inherited from the civilization of pre-dynastic Egypt. If it were the same 4th dynasty that built the pyramids with absolute precision, wouldn't they be able to construct a more appealing design for the Pharaoh Khafre? Wouldn't a pharaoh of his caliber have higher standards? So what could the original Sphinx have looked like before the reign of Khafre? Some theorists have speculated that the original appearance of the Sphinx was a jackal, as a representation of Anubis, god of the underworld. If this were the case, the statue would be facing west, towards the land of the dead. The east was identified with life and the birth of the sun, while the west was associated with death, mummification, and burial rites. Placing Anubis directly facing east would be considered sacrilege to the Egyptians. The sun rises in the east, signifying warmth, birth, and life. The Sphinx was meant to greet the sun as it emerges during the spring equinox. Consider Schock's proposed date of the Sphinx, and what it could have looked like during the epoch of 10,500 BCE. Due to precession, the stars behind the rising sun change position every 2100 years. This is the constellation that the Sphinx would have been gazing at, directly due east in the night sky.
Plus years ago was the age of Leo. It was when the constellation of Leo the Lion housed the sun on the spring equinox. The Great Sphinx is an equinoctial marker. It gazes precisely due east at the rising sun on the spring equinox, and now before dawn, 12,800 years ago, this is what the Great Sphinx would have seen. Its own celestial counterpart, the constellation of Leo, sitting on the horizon, in line with its gaze. An hour passes. The disk of the sun bisects the horizon, and the mechanism of the heavens locks into place. At that exact moment, the constellation of Orion locks exactly due south on the meridian, with the 3 belt stars in the pattern of the 3 great pyramids on the ground. And because of precession, the angle of the belt stars changes. It's wrong in 2500 BC. The layout of the pyramids matches the stars in 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago.
The mythology, symbology, and astrology of this image are too perfect. Around 10,500 BCE, when the pyramids align with the stars of the Belt of Orion, and the Milky Way aligns with the Nile River, the Sphinx gazes due east at its celestial counterpart in the heavens, the constellation of Leo. Either these are 3 extremely bizarre coincidences, or the ancient Egyptians were trying to transform Giza into an exact replica of the Egyptian sky. But when exactly during the age of Leo does this alignment take place? The constellation of Leo is 30 degrees along the ecliptic. The ecliptic moves only a finger's width in the sky every 72 years. The alignment had to have taken place sometime between 10,960 BCE to 8800 BCE, a 2,160-year window. A common rebuttal against this claim is that the dynastic Egyptians did not know about the traditional signs of the zodiac until it was introduced to them by the Greeks in 4th century BC. Herodotus, the Greek father of history, stated that the opposite was true. It was the Egyptians who taught the Greeks about astronomy. He has, on record, praised the priests of Heliopolis for their skill and knowledge in the field of astronomy. Dr. Alex Gerstein, the eminent Russian astronomer, argued that the Egyptians understood and recognized the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, namely Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Leo. Gerstein refers to this as the ecliptic quartet, which marked the 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes. In 10,500 BCE, during the summer solstice, the sun would be housed in the constellation of Leo. Directly opposite in the western sky, the water-bearer, or Aquarius, would be present. The Egyptians recognized the constellation directly due west, the god Hapi, responsible for the flood of the Nile. He is often depicted carrying a jug or pouring water. Hence, he is the water-bearer, or the Aquarius, of the Egyptian zodiac. 2 figures appear opposite the 2 sphinxes on the dream stele. One of them is believed to be Thutmose IV. He appears pouring water into a jug, a water-bearer appearing in front of a lion. This scene perfectly mimicking the polarity of the Leo and Aquarius constellations. Another common rebuttal is that the roots of modern civilization began in Sumer in the epoch of 4000 BCE. Proposing that a monument like the Great Sphinx of Giza was far older was considered blasphemy among the mainstream. Modern civilization could be no more than 6,000 years old. This was the prevailing model. But this model was shattered in the late 1990s when a massive stone structure was unearthed in Turkey. The site now called Gobekli Tepe is a sophisticated arrangement of intricate pillars designed by an intelligent group of early humans. Its exact purpose is unknown. Its engravings depict a combination of various animals, creatures, and abstract art. The real shock, however, is that mainstream archaeologists have a firm date on this monument, the era of 11,000 BCE. Gobekli Tepe has single-handedly shifted the accepted chronology of human history. If sites such as Gobekli Tepe exist in the world, is it possible that the Sphinx was built during the same era? What was so special about this era of 10,500 BCE, with the alignment of the celestial Nile, the Great Sphinx, and the pyramids to the 3 stars of Orion's belt? What could this era have looked like? We return back to the dream stele of the Sphinx, to a strange inscription which reads, "The splendid place of the Zep Tepe."